The restaurant buzzed with life, filled with the soft clinks of glasses and the low hum of conversations. It was one of those fancy places where every corner seemed polished to perfection, and the light bounced off the crystal chandeliers like tiny stars. Clara moved carefully through the tables, balancing a tray stacked with delicate glasses of sparkling water. She kept her eyes on the path ahead, weaving between the diners, careful not to bump into anyone. It was another busy evening, but Clara was used to the rush. She had learned to stay calm and collected, even when the restaurant felt like it might swallow her whole. Tonight, the crowd was a mix of regulars and a few new faces. Clara noticed them immediately. The ones who seemed larger than life, with expensive suits and watches that probably cost more than her apartment. One man in particular caught her eye. He sat at a table near the piano, the corner of the restaurant that was usually quiet except for soft background music. There was something about him that made people glance his way without even realizing it. He had a sharp presence, the kind that filled the room even when he said nothing. Clara had heard whispers among the staff about him. He was a billionaire known for his demanding nature and high standards. Some people said he could be charming when he wanted to, but most of the time he liked to test others, to see what they were really made of. Clara kept moving, delivering drinks to the tables with a polite smile. She had been working here for a few years now, and she knew all the little tricks to keep things smooth. She knew when a guest wanted to chat, and when they wanted to be left alone. Her eyes darted to the man again, and she noticed he wasn't just sitting quietly. He was watching her. There was a spark of curiosity in his eyes, the kind that made her stomach tighten a little. She forced herself to focus on her tasks, to ignore the feeling of being under a microscope. The evening went on, the room growing warmer with the presence of more people and the steady hum of conversation. Clara had just finished refilling a table when she heard a voice that made her freeze for a second. It was calm, but there was an edge to it that immediately drew attention. "Why don't you play something on that piano?" The voice belonged to the man she had been noticing. She glanced up, her heart skipping a beat. The piano was in the corner, polished and gleaming under the soft lights. Clara had played it before, but never in front of a crowd like this, and certainly never under the gaze of someone like him. Her first instinct was to shake her head politely and walk away. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to serve. But the man didn't take the hint. He leaned back slightly in his chair, watching her with a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Go on," he said. "It can't be that hard, can it?" His tone was teasing, almost mocking, and the people at the nearby tables had begun to turn their heads, curious about what was happening. Clara felt her cheeks heat up. She had always been careful to stay in the background, to let her work speak for itself, but now all eyes were on her. Clara took a deep breath and tried to come up with a polite excuse. I'm just here to serve," she said, keeping her voice steady. She felt the tray in her hand suddenly heavier, like it was weighing down her confidence. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "I think you underestimate yourself," he said. "I hear you're the one who keeps everything running smoothly here. Surely you can handle a little music?" The words hung in the air, drawing a few more curious glances. Clara's mind raced. Should she just say no and risk looking rude in front of everyone? Or should she step forward, face the challenge, and hope she could prove herself? She had always loved playing the piano. It was her secret, a piece of her world that she didn't share with anyone. She had grown up playing in small rooms, practicing until her fingers ached, losing herself in the music. But this was different. This was a room full of strangers, and one man who seemed to know how to push buttons without even trying. Clara felt a flicker of determination. She set the tray down carefully on a nearby table and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last, and she could feel the eyes of the diners following her. She kept her posture straight, trying to hide the nervous flutter in her chest. As she approached, she ran her fingers lightly over the polished keys, feeling the familiar smoothness under her touch. The sound was comforting, a small anchor in the storm of attention surrounding her. The man watched her closely, leaning slightly forward. "Go on," he said again. There was a challenge in his tone, but also something else. Something like curiosity, like he wanted to see if she could surprise him. Clara took another deep breath and let her hands find their place on the keys. She wasn't sure what she was going to play yet, but she knew the music would come to her as it always did. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the restaurant fade away, focusing only on the rhythm in her mind. She began with a simple melody, soft and tentative at first. The notes floated through the room, quiet but clear, capturing the attention of those nearby. People stopped talking. Their forks paused mid-bite as if the music had pulled the air from their lungs. Clara's confidence grew with each note, and soon her fingers moved with more assurance. The melody became richer, more complex, weaving through the room like a gentle current that drew everyone closer. As she played, she could feel a change in the atmosphere. The initial curiosity and skepticism in the room shifted to admiration and awe. People leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the sound that seemed to fill every corner. The man at the table, the billionaire, was watching intently, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he couldn't quite predict what would come next. Clara smiled faintly to herself, the nerves that had gripped her at the beginning starting to melt away. This was her world, her moment, and she was ready to let it shine. Minutes passed, though it felt like seconds. Clara's hands moved effortlessly over the keys, each note chosen with care and precision. The music built in layers, a tapestry of sound that spoke without words. She could hear the subtle gasps of diners, the soft murmur of appreciation that grew louder with every chord. Her heart raced, but not with fear. This was excitement, pure and exhilarating. She had never played for an audience like this before, and the reaction was both humbling and empowering. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the room was silent for a heartbeat, as if no one dared to breathe too loudly. Then gradually applause began to rise, not the polite, hesitant clapping of a small gesture, but the kind that started with one table and spread like wildfire through the restaurant. Clara's chest swelled with pride, a mixture of relief and joy washing over her. She had done it. She had faced the challenge and proven herself, not just to the man who had pressured her, but to everyone who had doubted her. The billionaire remained seated, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, faint but genuine. He leaned back in his chair and nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of her skill. Clara felt a small thrill at the recognition, knowing that she had earned it with nothing but her talent and determination. The other diners continued to applaud, some even rising from their seats, their eyes shining with surprise and admiration. Clara stepped back from the piano, letting the last notes linger in the air. She took a deep breath, her hands still tingling from the performance. The restaurant felt different now, alive with a new energy. People were talking in excited whispers, sharing their astonishment at the hidden talent of the young waitress. Clara returned to her duties, but there was a lightness in her step, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She had shown the world a piece of herself, and in doing so she had transformed not just the room, but herself. As she moved through the tables, delivering drinks and smiles, Clara caught the eye of the billionaire once more. There was no teasing in his gaze now, only respect, and something else she couldn't quite place. Curiosity, perhaps, or admiration. She smiled back politely, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went beyond words. Tonight had started like any other busy evening, but it had become a turning point, a moment where she had stepped out of the shadows and let her talent shine for all to see. After the first notes faded, the atmosphere in the restaurant was thick with surprise and admiration. The diners were still processing what they had just witnessed, many whispering to one another in disbelief. Clara, though returning to her regular tasks, could feel eyes still following her. Every movement seemed heavier, every step more noticed. She carried the trays with a careful precision, making sure not to spill anything, but there was an invisible tension in the air, a mixture of anticipation and curiosity, as if everyone was waiting for what she would do next. The billionaire, seated near the piano, seemed different now. His sharp gaze had softened slightly, though there was still a glint of challenge in his eyes. He was clearly intrigued by Clara's hidden talent. Instead of ignoring her like many would after a brief performance, he leaned forward, observing her as she moved from table to table. Clara caught his look for a moment and felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about the way he watched that made her heart beat faster. It wasn't fear anymore, not completely. It was a strange mixture of nerves and excitement, knowing that she had captured his attention. She returned to the corner of the restaurant where the piano sat, adjusting a chair slightly as if preparing for another performance. The man's presence loomed over her, though he didn't speak. The silence was heavy with unspoken expectation. Clara's mind raced. She had played before, yes, but never in such a public setting, and certainly never under the scrutiny of someone so influential. The thought made her stomach twist into knots, but she refused to back down. She had already taken the first step, and she wasn't going to let hesitation take over now. Some of the diners began to edge closer, their curiosity getting the better of them. A few whispered, asking each other if she would play again if she had more to show. Clara could hear the murmurs, but she tried to focus on the keys in front of her. Her fingers hovered for a moment above them, recalling the countless hours she had spent practicing in private, the melodies that had filled her childhood home, and the notes that had comforted her during difficult times. She reminded herself that this was familiar territory. The piano had always been a friend, a companion, a way to speak when words failed. The billionaire finally spoke, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made heads turn. "Play something that shows what you really can do," he said. "Not just a simple tune, something that will leave no doubt in anyone's mind." His words were both a challenge and an invitation. Clara felt the pressure tighten around her like a coil. She could almost hear the quiet murmurs of doubt from the people around her. Could a waitress truly play something that would captivate such a sophisticated crowd? Clara closed her eyes for a brief moment, drawing a deep breath. She let the memories of her training wash over her. The late nights when she practiced scales until her fingers ached. The days she spent teaching herself pieces she found difficult. The quiet moments when music was the only thing that made sense in her world. Slowly, she lifted her hands to the keys, feeling the familiar weight and texture beneath her fingers. The first notes were tentative, soft, like a whisper meant to test the room. She could feel the attention of every diner, the subtle shift in the air as they realized she was about to play again. As she continued, the melody began to take shape, richer and deeper than before. Clara's fingers moved with confidence, weaving a tapestry of sound that filled the entire restaurant. It was as if the music carried emotion beyond what words could express. Joy, longing, determination, and a quiet strength that seemed to resonate with everyone present. The diners stopped their conversations entirely, caught up in the performance. Even the staff paused briefly in their duties, watching in awe as the young waitress transformed the space with her talent. Clara could feel herself becoming absorbed in the music, losing awareness of the room and the eyes on her. Each note was deliberate, each chord carefully placed, but there was also a fluidity, a natural grace that made the performance feel effortless. She could hear the subtle reactions of the audience, the soft inhalations, the shifting in seats, the occasional tear glinting in someone's eye. The piano wasn't just producing sound, it was telling a story that had been locked inside her for years. The billionaire's reaction was the most fascinating of all. He remained seated, watching her closely, his expression a mixture of curiosity, surprise, and admiration. Clara could feel the weight of his attention, but it didn't scare her now. Instead, it fueled her performance, giving her the drive to play with even more emotion and clarity. She wanted him and the rest of the room to understand that her talent was real, that it had depth and power beyond what anyone might expect from someone who appeared to be just a waitress. Minutes passed, though to Clara it felt like hours. The music swelled, reached a peak, and then flowed into softer, more introspective passages. She could see the diners leaning forward, completely captivated. Some held their hands to their chests, others to their mouths, all caught up in the magic she was creating. The entire room seemed to have shifted, transformed from a casual dining space into a small concert hall where every listener was connected to the story her fingers were telling. When she finally concluded the piece, the silence that followed was almost tangible. The first notes of the final chord lingered in the air, reverberating through the room before a single clap broke the quiet. Then another and another until the entire restaurant erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming, not just in volume, but in emotion. Clara felt her chest swell with pride, a mix of relief and exhilaration. She had faced the challenge, embraced the pressure, and emerged victorious. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He raised a hand slightly, acknowledging her skill. Clara caught his gaze and returned a polite nod, feeling a quiet sense of triumph. She had silenced the room, yes, but more importantly, she had proven to herself that her talent was worthy of recognition, that it had a power that could touch others. The other diners continued to clap and whisper among themselves, sharing their astonishment at the young woman who had stepped out from behind her serving tray to command an audience with nothing but her music. As she stepped away from the piano, Clara felt a mixture of exhaustion and elation. The performance had drained her physically, but it had lifted her spirit in ways she couldn't fully describe. She returned to her duties, carrying drinks and smiling politely, but there was a noticeable change in her demeanor. She moved with more confidence now, aware that her abilities were seen and appreciated. Patrons who had previously regarded her with casual indifference now looked at her with respect, some even offering words of encouragement or praise. Throughout the evening, Clara remained mindful of the delicate balance between her role as a waitress and the emerging recognition of her talent. She knew that she had captured attention, but she also understood that the world outside the piano could still be harsh and unforgiving. Still, she felt a renewed determination. She would continue to serve, to work hard, but she would no longer hide the music that lived inside her. It was a part of her identity, and she had discovered that sharing it with others could create moments of beauty and connection that transcended social boundaries and expectations. The evening wound down, and the crowd began to thin. Clara took a moment to breathe, feeling the residual energy of the performance linger in the room. The pianist's corner, once just a piece of furniture, had become a stage, a place where her talent had shone brightly. She glanced at the billionaire one last time before he stood and left, leaving behind a sense of curiosity and admiration that she could still feel in the air. Clara returned to cleaning and organizing the tables, her hands steady, her mind racing with the possibilities of what could come next. She knew that her life had changed, even if only subtly, and that the piano would always be there, waiting for her to tell the stories that only she could play. The night after the performance, Clara could hardly sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the diners staring in awe as she played. The sound of their applause still echoed in her mind, and though it made her heart swell with pride, it also filled her with uncertainty. What would happen now? She was just a waitress after all. Could one song really change the course of her life? The next morning, she arrived at the restaurant early as she always did. The air was cool, and the faint scent of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen. Clara tied her apron around her waist and began setting up the tables, aligning each fork and glass with careful precision. It was her routine, her way of finding peace before the day began. But today felt different. There was a quiet hum of expectation in the air, as if the restaurant itself remembered what had happened the night before. As she was polishing the silverware, one of the other servers approached her. He leaned in close, lowering his voice. "You know that man from last night, the rich one, he called this morning," he said. Clara looked up, her hands freezing mid-motion. "He asked for you by name," the server continued. "Said he wanted to speak with you personally." Clara blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "He called for me?" she repeated softly. "What did he say?" The server shrugged. "Didn't say much. Just that he'd be coming by later." "Guess you made quite an impression." He gave her a knowing smile before walking away, leaving Clara standing there, her heart pounding. She tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting. Why would he come back? What did he want from her? By midday, the restaurant began to fill again, though the crowd was smaller than the night before. Clara went about her duties as usual, but every time the door opened, her heart jumped. Then, just after noon, he walked in. The billionaire. He looked as composed as ever, his tailored suit perfectly in place, his expression calm yet unreadable. This time, he didn't come with an entourage. He walked straight toward her. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice polite but direct. "Do you have a moment to talk?" Clara hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Of course," she replied quietly, leading him to a quiet corner of the restaurant. The other staff exchanged curious glances, but no one interrupted. He sat down, folding his hands neatly on the table. "I wanted to thank you for last night," he began. "Your performance was unexpected. Beautiful, really." His tone was sincere, but there was still that sharpness behind his words, the sound of a man used to being in control. Clara smiled shyly, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you, sir. I just played something I love." He nodded slowly, studying her face. "You have real talent. Not just skill, but emotion. That's rare." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "Have you ever considered pursuing music seriously?" The question took Clara by surprise. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure what to say. I used to dream about it, she admitted. But life doesn't always go the way we hope. I needed to work, and music became something I did for myself, not for others. The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as if calculating something. Sometimes opportunities come when we least expect them, he said. I happen to fund several art programs and events. I could arrange an audition for you, something small, but it could lead somewhere. Clara stared at him, stunned. An audition? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. She had dreamed of performing on a real stage for as long as she could remember, but the idea of stepping into that world again felt overwhelming. Yes, he replied simply. You have the talent. You just need the chance to show it. He slid a small card across the table. This is my assistant's number. If you're interested, call. I'll make the arrangements. Clara picked up the card, her fingers trembling slightly. I don't know what to say, she murmured. Say yes, he said with a faint smile. You deserve it. Then, with the same calm composure he always carried, he stood, nodded politely, and left the restaurant. For a long moment, Clara just sat there, staring at the card in her hand. The weight of it felt heavier than paper. It felt like a key to something she had thought she'd lost forever. She slipped it into her apron pocket and returned to work, but her mind was far away, lost in a whirlwind of hope and fear. That evening, after her shift, Clara walked home through the quiet streets, the sound of her footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. The city lights shimmered in puddles left by a light rain, and for the first time in a long while she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to stand on a real stage again. To play for an audience, not because someone pressured her, but because she belonged there. When she reached her small apartment, she took out the card and placed it on her table. She sat in silence for a long time, staring at it, thinking about everything that could happen if she made that call. Finally, she took a deep breath and picked up her phone. The next few days moved quickly. The billionaire's assistant arranged a private audition in a modest concert hall downtown. Clara spent every spare moment practicing, her fingers dancing over the worn keys of her old keyboard at home. She could feel the nerves building, but beneath them was a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't sure what the outcome would be, but she knew she had to try. On the day of the audition, she woke up early and dressed carefully. She wore a simple outfit, neat but not extravagant. Her heart pounded as she arrived at the hall. It was an elegant space with high ceilings and rows of empty seats that stretched into the shadows. The billionaire was there, sitting quietly in the front row, along with a few other people who looked like organizers or judges. Clara swallowed hard, trying to calm herself. One of the coordinators gestured for her to begin. She approached the piano slowly, her palms slightly damp, and took a deep breath. The familiar feel of the keys under her fingers steadied her. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the world fade away. The first notes filled the air, soft but clear, like the start of a story. Clara poured everything she had into the performance, the fear, the hope, the years of longing. Her fingers moved with precision, but more than that, they moved with heart. The music grew richer, swelling through the hall, echoing off the walls like waves. She didn't think about the people watching. She just played. For those few minutes, she was completely free. When she finished, the silence that followed was deep and heavy, much like the one at the restaurant that night. Then slowly the billionaire began to clap. The others followed, their applause growing louder until the sound filled the hall. Clara looked up, tears welling in her eyes. She had done it again. After the audition, the billionaire approached her. That was remarkable, he said simply. You have a gift and it shouldn't go to waste. I'll be in touch with the details, but I think we can find a place for you in one of our upcoming events. Clara could barely speak. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. You don't know what this means to me. He gave her a small, knowing smile. I think I do. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, heart full and mind spinning. That night, Clara returned home exhausted but happy. She sat by her window looking out at the city lights, the sounds of distant traffic mixing with her thoughts. For the first time in years, she felt like her life was moving forward, like she was finally stepping into the future she had once dreamed about. The fear was still there, of course, it always would be, but now it was joined by something stronger, hope. She closed her eyes and smiled softly to herself. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. Music had always been her language, her way of reaching people's hearts. And now, thanks to one unexpected encounter, she finally had the chance to let the world hear her voice again. The days after the audition felt like a dream for Clara. She still went to work at the restaurant, serving tables and greeting customers with her usual kindness. But something inside her had changed. Every time she touched a glass or set down a plate, she felt the memory of the piano beneath her fingertips. The music she had played at the audition still echoed in her heart, reminding her that she was more than what people saw. The billionaire had promised to contact her, but as the days passed, Clara tried not to let her hopes rise too high. She had learned long ago that promises, even kind ones, sometimes faded away. Still, she carried her phone with her everywhere, checking it between shifts just in case. Each time it buzzed, her heart would leap only to settle when it wasn't him. Then on the 5th day it happened. Her phone rang while she was wiping down a table. She looked at the screen and froze. The number was unfamiliar, but something told her it was him. She quickly stepped into the hallway and answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice soft but steady. "Clara," came the familiar calm tone. "It's me. I wanted to let you know that your audition went exceptionally well. Everyone was impressed. We're organizing a charity gala next month, and I'd like you to perform there." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The words hung in the air like music themselves. "Me perform at a gala?" she finally managed to say. "Yes," he replied. "It will be a large event, many guests, artists, and business figures. I think it's the perfect opportunity for you to show your talent to a wider audience. My team will handle everything. All you need to do is prepare your music." Clara leaned against the wall, feeling her heart race. I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say yes," he said gently, the same way he had before. "You've earned this." When the call ended, Clara stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in disbelief. Then a smile spread across her face, wide and bright. She couldn't wait to tell someone, but she realized there was no one close enough to share it with. Her family lived far away, and her friends at work would probably be surprised, maybe even doubtful. Still, it didn't matter. For the first time in years, she felt seen. The next few weeks became a blur of preparation. The billionaire's assistant called her often, checking details, arranging practice spaces, and confirming the schedule. Clara spent every free hour rehearsing, her small apartment filled with the sound of piano melodies, her fingers moving tirelessly over the keys. Some nights she played until her hands ached, but she didn't mind. The thought of performing at the gala pushed her forward. As the day of the event drew closer, her nerves began to build. The assistant had sent her photos of the venue, a grand hall with glittering chandeliers and gold-lined walls. The kind of place she could never have imagined being in, let alone performing in. Clara worried that she didn't belong there. But each time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the music. When she played, the rest of the world disappeared. That was her strength. Finally, the night of the gala arrived. Clara arrived early, dressed in a simple but elegant gown that the team had provided for her. It was soft blue, flowing and graceful, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The staff guided her backstage where the grand piano sat under a spotlight. The sight of it made her breath catch in her throat. She took a deep breath and ran her fingers lightly over the keys. The smooth surface felt familiar, calming. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "You can do this." Soon, guests began to fill the hall. From behind the curtain, Clara could hear the soft chatter of voices, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of music. When she peeked out, she saw a sea of elegant people, men in tuxedos, women in sparkling dresses, all gathered around beautifully decorated tables. Among them, she spotted the billionaire. He was speaking with a group of people, but for a moment he turned his head and met her eyes. He gave her a small nod, reassuring and confident. It steadied her nerves. As the lights dimmed, an announcer took the stage to welcome the guests. "Tonight," he said, "we have a very special performance. A young woman whose talent was discovered right here in our city. A reminder that sometimes brilliance can come from the most unexpected places. Please welcome Clara." Applause filled the hall as she stepped onto the stage. Her heart pounded, her palms damp, but her steps were steady. She reached the piano and sat down, feeling the weight of the moment. The hall fell silent. She took one deep breath and began to play. The first notes echoed through the room, soft but clear. They carried across the tables, pulling every ear and eye toward her. The melody grew stronger, richer, wrapping around the audience like a warm embrace. Clara poured her soul into every note, the struggles she had faced, the quiet moments of hope, the dreams she had never let go of. The music told her story better than words ever could. People who had been chatting moments ago sat frozen in their seats. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. Others leaned forward, captivated. Even the servers paused for a moment, listening. The billionaire sat still, his expression calm but his eyes shining with pride. He had taken a chance on her, and she was proving that his faith was not misplaced. As Clara played, she felt something shift inside her. The fear melted away, replaced by joy. This was where she belonged. The lights, the stage, the piano, it all felt right. She could feel the audience's energy, their hearts beating with hers through the rhythm of the music. When the final note lingered and faded into silence, she looked up, breathless. The hall was completely still for a moment. Then the applause erupted, loud, genuine, and overwhelming. Some guests stood clapping with tears in their eyes. The billionaire rose to his feet, leading the standing ovation. Clara's chest tightened with emotion, her vision blurring as she smiled through tears. After the performance, several guests approached her, eager to meet the woman who had stolen the evening. They praised her talent, some even asking where they could hear her play again. The billionaire stayed by her side, introducing her proudly to those who wanted to know more. "She's not just talented," he said to one man. "She's extraordinary." Clara blushed, grateful but overwhelmed by the attention. She had never been surrounded by such admiration before. When the crowd began to thin, she finally found a quiet moment with the billionaire. "You did more than I expected," he said softly. "You didn't just play, you touched everyone in that room." Clara smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for giving me the chance." He shook his head slightly. "No, you earned it. I only opened the door. You walked through it." They stood there for a moment in silence, the sounds of the fading party echoing around them. Clara felt an immense sense of gratitude. She had been invisible for so long, just another face in a busy restaurant. But tonight, she had found her place in the light. Later that night, as she walked home under the glow of the city lights, she couldn't stop smiling. The cool air brushed against her face, carrying with it the faint echo of applause. Every step felt lighter, as if the weight she had carried for years had finally lifted. She had faced her fears, shared her music, and found her voice again. When she reached her apartment, she set the gown aside carefully and sat by the window, looking out at the city skyline. Her reflection in the glass looked different now, stronger, more alive. The night had been magical, but deep down she knew this was only the beginning. The world had hurt her once. Now she was ready to let it hear her again and again. Clara rested her head against the window pane and closed her eyes, a soft smile playing on her lips. The piano would always be her home, and as long as she had her music, she would never be lost again. Weeks passed after the gala, and Clara's life slowly began to change in ways she had never imagined. The video of her performance had been shared online by some of the guests, and it quickly spread. People from all over the country watched it, moved by the story of a humble waitress whose music silenced a room full of the wealthy and powerful. Messages began to pour in, people thanking her for inspiring them, others asking where they could hear her next performance. At first, Clara found it hard to believe that the world cared so much about her story. Every time she opened her phone, she saw new comments and articles praising her. "The waitress who played her way into everyone's hearts," one headline read. She smiled shyly when she saw it, still feeling like the same person who used to mop floors and serve coffee every morning. The billionaire called her a few days later. His tone was calm but proud. "You've become quite the sensation," he said. "People can't stop talking about your performance. I think it's time we take the next step." Clara listened quietly, unsure what he meant. "Next step?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "You've shown what you can do. Now I want to help you build something bigger. A full concert, your own show. My team can handle the arrangements, and I'll make sure the right people are there." Her heart began to race again. The idea of performing a full concert felt both thrilling and terrifying. "Do you really think people would come just to hear me?" she asked softly. He chuckled gently. "They already love you, Clara. And not just for your music, for your story. You've shown them that talent and grace can come from anywhere. They'll come. After the call, Clara sat in silence for a long time, trying to take it all in. A concert of her own. It sounded unreal, but the more she thought about it, the more she wanted to do it. Not for fame or money, but for the people who had believed in her, and for herself. The following weeks became another whirlwind of preparation. The Billionaire's team booked a beautiful concert hall in the city, one known for hosting world-class musicians. Posters with her name began appearing around town. The first time she saw one, she stopped on the sidewalk, staring at it with disbelief. Her name printed in elegant letters right under the words "An Evening of Hope and Harmony." It didn't feel real. Every day she practiced for hours, perfecting each piece she planned to perform. The Billionaire often stopped by during rehearsals, listening quietly from the back of the room. He rarely interrupted, but once in a while, he would offer gentle advice or simply nod in approval. There was something in his eyes, respect, admiration, that reminded her how far she had come from being the nervous waitress who once stood at his restaurant piano. The night of the concert arrived sooner than she expected. The hall was packed. Hundreds of people filled the seats, from art lovers and music critics to everyday fans who had been moved by her story. The lights shimmered, the air buzzing with excitement. Backstage, Clara took deep breaths, her hands slightly trembling. The Billionaire found her just before she went on stage. "Are you ready?" he asked, smiling. She nodded slowly. "As ready as I'll ever be." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember, this is your moment. Don't think about the crowd. Just play from your heart like you always do." When her name was announced, the audience erupted in applause. Clara stepped onto the stage, her elegant gown flowing with each step. The sight before her took her breath away. The sea of faces, the soft glow of lights, the grand piano waiting at the center. She bowed slightly, then sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. The moment she began to play, the nerves disappeared. The music took over, guiding her through the stories she wanted to tell. Each song carried a part of her journey. The pain of being overlooked, the quiet strength she found in herself, the joy of rediscovering her purpose. Her music was pure emotion, and it filled every corner of the hall. As the night went on, she played with more confidence, more passion. The audience was completely captivated. Some leaned forward, holding their breath during the soft, tender passages. Others wiped away tears during the emotional crescendos. Clara could feel their energy, their hearts connecting with hers through every note. When she reached the final song, she took a moment to look out at the crowd. "This last piece," she said softly, "is for everyone who has ever been told they're not good enough. For those who've worked hard in silence, waiting for a chance to be heard. I hope my music reminds you to never stop believing in yourself." Her voice trembled slightly, but her words rang true. She began to play, and the hall grew silent once more. The melody was gentle at first, like a whisper of hope, then grew into something powerful and freeing. The room seemed to glow with emotion as her fingers moved across the keys, each note carrying a message of courage and love. When the final chord faded, there was a pause, a heartbeat of silence, before the audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. The sound was thunderous. Flowers were thrown onto the stage, and some people even shouted her name. Clara bowed, overwhelmed with gratitude, tears streaming down her face. The Billionaire joined her on stage, smiling proudly as he applauded with the crowd. When the applause finally began to fade, he leaned close and said quietly, "You've done it. You've changed more than just your own life tonight." Clara looked out at the audience, her heart full. She realized he was right. She had come from a small, quiet world, but through her music she had reached people far beyond what she'd ever dreamed. After the concert, people lined up to meet her. Some thanked her for inspiring them. Others told her how her story reminded them not to give up. A few even shared their own dreams, saying they felt brave enough to chase them now. Each word touched her deeply. Later that night, as she sat backstage with the Billionaire, she finally found the courage to ask what she had been wondering all along. "Why did you choose me that day in the restaurant?" she asked. "You could have picked anyone." He smiled thoughtfully. "Because when you looked at that piano, I saw something in your eyes that most people lose over time. Pure love for what you do. You didn't want fame or attention. You just wanted to play. I knew that kind of passion couldn't stay hidden forever." Clara nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered. He shook his head gently. No, Clara, you believed in yourself. That's what made all this possible. The two of them sat quietly for a while, the faint sound of laughter and music still drifting from the hall. The night felt calm, almost magical. Clara thought about how everything had started, from being a waitress cleaning tables to standing on one of the biggest stages in the city. It wasn't just luck. It was persistence, courage, and the music that had never left her. When she finally left the concert hall, the streets were quiet. The stars shimmered faintly above, and the city lights glowed softly below. She walked slowly, her steps light, her heart full. Somewhere in the distance, she could still hear the echo of applause, like a promise that this was only the beginning. Over the next few months, Clara continued to play. Invitations came from across the country, and she began to perform at more events and concerts. But she never forgot where she came from. Whenever she passed by the little restaurant where it all began, she would smile. Sometimes she even stopped by for a cup of coffee, sitting quietly at one of the tables watching the waiters move about, just as she once did. One evening, as she sat there, a young girl came up to her shyly. "Excuse me," the girl said, holding a small notebook. "Are you Clara, the pianist?" Clara smiled warmly. "Yes, I am." The girl's eyes lit up. "I watched your concert online. You were amazing. I want to play piano too, but people say it's too hard." Clara leaned forward, her voice gentle. "It is hard sometimes, but that's what makes it beautiful. Don't let anyone stop you from trying. If you love it, keep going. One day your music will find its way to someone's heart." The girl nodded eagerly, her face glowing with hope. Clara signed her notebook and watched her run back to her family, smiling to herself. She saw a little bit of her younger self in that girl, full of dreams, full of questions, full of quiet strength. As the sun began to set outside, Clara felt a deep peace settle over her. She knew her journey wasn't just about music anymore. It was about giving others the courage to follow their dreams no matter where they started. That night, when she returned home, she sat down at her piano. The soft light from the lamp fell across the keys and she began to play a new melody, one that told the story of everything she had lived, everything she had learned. The sound filled the room, rich and warm, wrapping her in comfort. When she finished, she looked out the window at the stars and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in a long time, Clara didn't wonder what would happen next. She didn't worry about fame or success. She just felt grateful for the music, for the kindness she had received, and for the chance to share it with the world. Her story had started in a small restaurant, but it had grown far beyond its walls. And as long as there were people who needed hope, Clara knew her music would never stop playing.